We're going to review the evidence presented in this case.
The court will now come to order.
What happens when a seasoned judge known for his calm restraint finally unleashes a single brutal line that silences a political firebrand on live TV? The answer begins in a studio that hums with nervous electricity. Bright lights pierce the air, cameras swivel, microphones hiss with the anticipation of voices not yet raised. On the monitors, the Chiron flashes bold letters announcing the clash to come. Viewers across the nation lean closer to their screens, not yet knowing they are seconds away from a moment destined to ripple far beyond this broadcast. Pam Bondi charges onto the stage with the force of a storm. Every gesture is sharpened, every word rehearsed for dominance. She thrives on confrontation, feeding off the spectacle, confident that volume will always outpace reason. Headlines have primed her arrival, promising fireworks, and she seems determined to deliver them. Her smile is quick, her stance unyielding, her presence designed to command the cameras. The audience senses it. This is not a debate, it is a performance. And then, opposite her, sits Edward Chen. His posture is unassuming, his eyes steady, his voice measured even in silence. For a moment, he almost disappears into the background, as though the spectacle refuses to acknowledge him. That quietness, however, is not weakness. It is a gravity pulling the scene toward an inevitability the crowd has yet to imagine. He is a man whose career has been built not on theatrics but on the weight of words carefully chosen. He does not interrupt, he does not fidget, he waits. The contrast is stark noise against stillness, bluster against control. Cameras capture every flicker of Bondi's performance, but behind them producers whisper about Chen. They know restraint can be lethal when unleashed at the right second. The tension builds as Bondi grows louder, more dismissive, unaware that every overreach brings her closer to the moment that will define this night. And then comes the promise hanging in the air like a storm about to break. One sentence, carefully timed, will shatter the performance, cut through the noise, and leave a nation stunned. You won't believe how one line turned an entire broadcast upside down. Before the cameras, before the clash, there was the man himself, Edward Chen. His name may not have carried the thundering notoriety of political celebrities, but in the circles where substance mattered more than spectacle, his reputation was quietly formidable. Born to a family that believed in discipline and perseverance, Chen carved his path not through shortcuts or headlines, but through patience, study, and an unshakable sense of duty. Law was never merely a profession to him. It was a language, a calling, a responsibility. Over the years, his colleagues came to know him for qualities rarely celebrated in a world addicted to noise. He did not grandstand. He did not seek cameras. His strength lay in precision, in the weight of arguments sharpened down to their essence. When Chen spoke, it was not to fill air. It was to cut through it. Fairness was his armor, intellect his weapon, and silence his strategy. Where others built their influence on flair, he built his on respect, and in the process, earned the trust of those who understood that true authority whispers long before it shouts. That is what made this moment so extraordinary. Chen was not a man of theatrics, yet here he was, pulled into a televised confrontation designed as spectacle. This was no courtroom governed by rules of decorum. It was a stage dressed as news, an arena where rhetoric and ratings mattered as much as truth. The very format was stacked against him. The nation wasn't tuning in for quiet reason. They wanted blood sport. Against Pam Bondi, a media-hardened performer who thrived on provocation, the odds seemed cruelly uneven. And yet, that imbalance was the very point. If Chen could hold his ground here, amid flashing lights, biting interruptions, and jeering commentary, it would mean something more than winning an argument. It would mean proving that dignity still had a place in a culture addicted to arrogance. The stakes were larger than the panel before him. The struggle represented the collision of two values: truth versus spin, patience versus bluster, principle versus theater. To watch was to witness a deeper question: can reason survive in an environment designed for chaos? The cameras magnified this conflict, broadcasting not just words but the clash of worldviews. Bondi leaned into her role, knowing her audience wanted spectacle. Chen, however, refused to shed his identity. He would not shout to compete with volume. He would not trade dignity for airtime. His power came from something rarer: the ability to wait until the perfect moment to strike. That patience was unnerving. It was the kind of stillness that made his allies confident and his adversaries restless. Even as Bondi pressed forward, her tone rising like a drumbeat of arrogance, Chen remained unmoved. Every time she mocked, he stayed still. Every time she cut across his words, he paused. To outsiders, it looked like weakness. To those who knew him, it was the calm before precision. Because Edward Chen understood something few did. In an age obsessed with endless chatter, silence could be the sharpest blade. and so the foreshadowing settled like a shadow over the studio. This wasn't just about law. It wasn't just about debate. It was about exposing truth under pressure, about proving that one well-placed sentence could dismantle a storm of arrogance. The audience didn't yet know it, but history was about to turn on the power of restraint. Pam Bondi had long since mastered the art of television combat. Her persona was forged not in quiet deliberation, but in the crucible of endless cable panels where the loudest voice won the hour. Combative and unapologetic, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who understood that, in the age of spectacle, aggression often outweighed substance. Each appearance was a performance, sharp gestures, calculated smirks, practiced lines delivered with enough venom to spark instant headlines. She thrived on controversy, and controversy rewarded her in return. Viewers remembered the fire, not the details. She knew this, leaned into it, and built her image around the certainty that volume could erase vulnerability. In debates past, she had cornered rivals with interruptions, drowned out their points with practiced outrage, and left audiences with the impression of victory simply because she refused to yield an inch of ground. To her supporters, she was bold. To her critics, she was relentless. To television producers, she was reliable fuel for ratings. And so, as she stepped into this confrontation, the expectation was set. She had done it before, steamrolled quieter voices, turned dialogue into theater, and walked away unscathed. Why should tonight be any different? The cameras, the stage, the audience all seemed perfectly tailored to her advantage. Once again, she was poised to dominate through sheer force of will. Yet therein lay the irony. The very strength that had carried her so far, her aggressive mastery of the television stage, was about to become the flaw that unraveled her. Each sharpened interruption, each dismissive scoff, each overconfident glance was not building dominance. It was building a trap, and for the first time, Pam Bondi was about to discover that not every performance ends the way it is scripted. The exchange began like so many others before it. Pam Bondi seizing control with a barrage of interruptions, her voice pitched high enough to slice through the studio noise. Each time Judge Chen opened his mouth, her words rushed in, cutting him off before his thought could take shape. She leaned forward, hand gestures sharp, tone rising with each exchange, commanding the cameras as if they were extensions of her will. The spectacle was hers, and she knew it. Chen, in contrast, answered with calm restraint. His sentences were measured, deliberate, each word chosen with care. Yet that very patience in the glare of television lights seemed to betray him. His voice, low and steady, struggled against the roar of Bondi's performance. Viewers watching live began to fidget, their frustration growing as the imbalance became undeniable. On social media, early reactions trickled in, complaints that the judge looked outmatched. Drowned out, eclipsed, the momentum tilted sharply in Bondi's favor. Each dismissive scoff, each mocking grin, pushed the perception further. She was dominating, and he was fading. For Chen's supporters, the sight was painful. For his critics, it was confirmation. It seemed arrogance would once again triumph over dignity, that the louder voice would write the narrative before reason ever had a chance. And yet, the stakes were larger than pride. This was not just about two people clashing under bright lights. It was about whether truth, carried by patience and precision, could withstand the storm of arrogance on a stage built for noise. The audience leaned in, torn between frustration and hope, wondering if calm could possibly survive in a world addicted to spectacle. The question loomed, could Edward Chen find a way to turn silence into strength? Pam Bondi was in her element, and she knew it. The studio was her arena, and she treated it like a stage play where volume, timing, and swagger were all that mattered. Every time Judge Chen attempted to respond, she leaned forward with a dismissive laugh, interrupting, cutting him down mid-sentence, and pivoting the conversation back to herself. Her words were sharp, not for their substance, but for their ability to dominate the rhythm of the exchange. The more she spoke, the louder she grew, as though sheer sound could be proof of her authority. On the studio monitors, the image split into two boxes, Bondi filling her frame with relentless energy, while Chen appeared almost ghost-like in his calm stillness. The contrast was jarring. The scrolling ticker below flashed real-time reactions, and social media commentary began to pour in. Chen's getting steamrolled, one post declared. Another mocked, blink twice if you're a live judge. The imbalance was visible to millions, magnified by every tweet, every reaction, every camera angle designed to showcase confrontation rather than clarity. Bondi smirked, emboldened by the perception that she was winning. She leaned back with an air of triumph, her eyes flicking toward the cameras, as though savoring the knowledge that the audience was on her side. Her words dripped with condescension, taunting Chen as if he were an opponent already defeated. She had no reason to believe otherwise. The show's format, the crowd's hunger for drama, and the instant gratification of social media all seemed to conspire in her favor. And yet, beneath the surface, something subtle began to shift. Chen did not rush to correct her. He did not raise his voice or fight for space. Instead, he allowed the storm to rage unchecked. With every insult she lobbed, every interruption she piled on, Chen sat straighter, eyes focused, his composure unshaken. He was waiting not with passivity, but with calculation. He understood the danger of this environment, knew that fighting noise with noise would only drown the truth further. So he chose a weapon she could not anticipate: time. Every second of silence he gave her was deliberate. It was an invitation for her to keep talking, to keep overextending, to keep piling arrogance upon arrogance until the performance grew unsustainable. The more she spoke, the more reckless her words became. She interrupted too often, cut too sharply, pressed too aggressively, until her dominance began to blur into desperation. The audience, at first entertained, slowly began to sense the imbalance shifting, not yet in Chen's favor, but toward something uncertain, something waiting just outside the frame. The tension in the studio was palpable. Producers whispered nervously into headsets. Camera operators adjusted lenses, unsure whether to linger on Bondi's theatrics or Chen's stillness. Even the live audience fell into a different rhythm, the laughter at her quips giving way to murmurs, a low hum of anticipation they couldn't quite explain. It was as though everyone sensed the edge of something approaching, though no one could yet see its shape. Bondi, too intoxicated by her own momentum, missed the shift entirely. She mistook Chen's restraint for weakness, his silence for surrender. With each jab, she grew bolder, her performance swelling into overconfidence. She circled her words like a predator savoring the final strike, unaware that she was walking into the very trap she had mocked him for setting. And then the moment hung suspended, invisible but undeniable. The air in the studio thickened, the chatter of live tweets slowed into repetition, and the split screens captured the starkness of the scene. Bondi still talking, Chen still silent. The contrast no longer looked like dominance. It looked like inevitability. Every second, tension mounted. The viewers at home leaned closer, restless, waiting for the collision they could sense but not yet see. They didn't know when it would come or how, but the truth hovered over the broadcast like a storm cloud ready to break. Somewhere deep in the silence, Edward Chen was preparing his strike. Pam Bondi was in full flight now, voice soaring, her tone cutting through the air like a blade dulled only by repetition. She pointed, scoffed, and rolled her eyes with the confidence of someone certain the stage was hers alone. For several long minutes, the exchange was not a debate but a monologue, her performance swelling to fill every inch of the studio. And still, Edward Chen did not move. His stillness became a presence in itself, an almost invisible tension holding everything together. He waited, not with the hesitation of a man defeated, but with the certainty of one calculating the exact moment to strike. Bondi leaned in, interrupting once again, her words dripping with disdain. "Judge, with all due respect, this isn't a courtroom. You can't hide behind silence forever." That was the moment. The line had been offered to him, handed over like a careless gift wrapped in arrogance. Chen's eyes lifted, calm and sharp, and his voice broke into the storm with a precision that shattered the rhythm of the broadcast. "Pam," he said, his tone quiet but carrying weight. "Sometimes silence is stronger than all your noise." 7 words, that was all. 7 words that landed heavier than any outburst, sharper than any retort she had thrown his way. The effect was immediate and devastating. The studio froze. Cameras caught Bondi's face, her smirk faltering, her lips parting as if to respond but no words arriving. The line had cut directly through her armor, exposing the hollowness of the performance she had built. The silence that followed was not weakness. It was power, a thunderclap that needed no sound to be heard. The audience gasped. A ripple of shock moved through the studio, the kind of sound that emerges not from entertainment but from witnessing a moment no one expected. For once, it was not Bondi who owned the silence. It was Chen. His words hung in the air, lingering like smoke, refusing to fade, and outside the studio the reaction ignited instantly. Social media erupted in a tidal wave of clips and captions. "CLENC Tanaisa" flashed across thousands of timelines within seconds. Memes appeared in real time, Bondi frozen mid-expression beside Chen's composed stare, hashtags multiplied, trending worldwide before the segment had even ended. 7 words became a rallying cry, a shorthand for the triumph of clarity over chaos. Commentators scrambled to analyze the moment, each clip replayed endlessly. Anchors who had been preparing their next talking points abandoned them to marvel at the precision of the strike. Late-night writers already drafted monologues around it. It was not just a debate anymore. It was a cultural moment crystallized in a single sentence. Why did the line cut so deep? Because it exposed everything she had tried to conceal. Her dominance was never about substance, it was theater. Chen's words revealed that truth in the clearest possible way. By naming her noise for what it was, he stripped away the illusion of power she had wielded. The more she had performed, the more hollow it seemed in the face of his restraint. It wasn't merely a rebuttal, it was an unmasking, and the restraint itself was the key. Had Chen shouted back, had he met her arrogance with equal fury, the moment would have dissolved into noise against noise, indistinguishable from every other spectacle the public had seen. But he had waited, absorbing the blows, allowing her to overextend until her performance was brittle. Then, with surgical calm, he placed a single line exactly where it would land with maximum force. The contrast between her chaos and his control made the strike unforgettable. For viewers, the emotional payoff was immediate. Frustration, which had been building with every interruption, broke into cathartic release. Those who had doubted him moments earlier found themselves cheering at their screens, exhilarated that arrogance had finally collapsed under its own weight. Bondi's years of dominating through bluster had met their match, not in volume, but in the precision of silence weaponized at the perfect moment. Bondi, visibly stunned, tried to recover. She opened her mouth to respond, but the rhythm was gone, the performance cracked. Her words stumbled, her timing faltered. The confidence she had worn so easily only minutes earlier slipped, replaced with the uneasy flicker of someone who realized the narrative had slipped beyond her control. No matter what she said next, the audience would not hear her. They would hear the echo of Chen's line. And Chen, he did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply sat back in the same calm that had carried him through the storm, letting the moment speak for itself. That was the final mastery. He understood that power does not need repetition. The line had been delivered, and nothing could undo it. As the segment continued, the imbalance reversed completely. Bondi's volume no longer looked like strength. It looked like desperation. Chen's silence no longer seemed like weakness. It was authority. The studio's energy shifted, producers sensing the story that had just written itself. Every future replay of the exchange would build to that single sentence, the moment where the undercurrent of patience rose to crush the wave of arrogance. In just 7 words. The narrator's voice might have said, he undid her entire performance. If for the audience, it was more than entertainment. It was a reminder that noise is not the same as truth, that performance cannot replace substance, and that sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest weight. They had not expected to witness it here, on this stage built for chaos, but they had. And in that recognition came catharsis, the collective sense that arrogance had finally been humbled before their eyes. What happened in that studio would not stay contained within its walls. It was replayed, shared, dissected, and immortalized. For Edward Chen, it was not about victory or personal triumph. It was about demonstrating a principle that felt almost forgotten. That silence, when wielded with intent, can destroy the loudest storm. For Pam Bondi, it was the moment her strength betrayed her, the performance collapsing under the weight of truth revealed. And for everyone watching, it was a revelation they would not soon forget. The aftershock was immediate. Pam Bondi, who only moments earlier had commanded the airwaves with cutting certainty, suddenly faltered. Her eyes darted toward the cameras, then back to Chen, as if searching for a foothold she could no longer find. Words stumbled from her lips, stammering half-sentences. The rhythm broken. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out brittle, exposed. For the first time that night, the performance felt like an act, and the audience knew it. Judge Edward Chen did not move. He sat in the same steady posture, hands folded, his gaze even. No triumph flashed across his expression, no satisfaction. That was his victory. The refusal to descend into the spectacle she had crafted. His silence continued to weigh more than her scrambling words. Each second of composure reasserted his authority, not just as a judge, but as a figure of dignity in a room consumed by noise. And it was here, in the widening gulf between them, that the clash shifted. This was no longer about a personal duel. It became something larger, an ideological face-off laid bare in real time. Bondi represented performance, the brash certainty that volume can create truth. Chen embodied restraint, the belief that dignity and clarity must anchor public discourse. Their exchange ceased to be about who spoke louder. It was about which values would stand. The cameras caught the contrast mercilessly. On one side, Bondi, flustered, her voice rising higher as she tried to regain lost ground. On the other, Chen, unmoved, unshaken, the weight of his silence carrying more meaning than any rebuttal could. Viewers felt the difference instantly. The clash wasn't symmetrical anymore. It was moral. Outside the studio, the ripple effect expanded. Anchors broke in with astonished tones. Pundits who had long criticized Chen for being too quiet now praised his discipline. This, one analyst declared on a rival network, is the kind of composure that restores faith in leadership. Clips flooded every platform, but the commentary shifted from spectacle to substance. It was no longer about who won an argument. It was about what kind of voice the public trusted to cut through the chaos. Audiences who had tuned in for entertainment found themselves gripped by something more profound. They saw arrogance stripped of its glamour, revealed as brittle when confronted with quiet conviction. They saw dignity win, not by overpowering but by enduring. In living rooms across the country, viewers leaned forward, nodding, murmuring agreement, their frustration dissolving into relief. For years, Bondi's style had thrived in the age of outrage, interruptions, sound bites, and the confidence of never yielding. But on this night, Chen demonstrated the opposite truth, that humility could be sharper, that composure could pierce louder than insult. His line had not just silenced her, it had reframed the entire debate. The ideological current was unmistakable. Justice and dignity had triumphed over arrogance. By the time the segment closed, the verdict was clear. Bondi had not recovered. The more she spoke, the weaker her words became. The more Chen stayed steady, the stronger his presence grew. And when the lights dimmed, when the cameras cut away, the story that traveled outward was not about political sparring. It was about a principle laid bare before a nation weary of noise. In that showdown, viewers witnessed more than a clash of personalities. They witnessed a moral order restored, however briefly, in a world that often rewards spectacle. And they knew it, the calm voice had won. By the next morning, the fallout had already crystallized into a cultural event. Hashtags blazed across social media. Pan Chancelance's Bondi for 7-word smackdown, a truth over noise. Clips of the exchange ricocheted from one platform to another, looping endlessly with captions that highlighted the single devastating line. Some slowed the footage to emphasize Bondi's stunned expression, others set it to dramatic music, the moment replayed like a cinematic climax. Within hours, the viral machine had done its work. Judge Edward Chen's quiet interruption had become the line heard around the country. Late-night comedy shows wasted no time. Monologues skewered Bondi's collapse, replaying her stammering attempt to recover, cutting it against Chen's serene delivery. Audiences laughed, but behind the humor, a truth lingered. The comedy worked because the imbalance was undeniable. A woman who had come to dominate with arrogance was undone by restraint. In the broader media, the framing shifted decisively. Analysts labeled Bondi the overreacher, a performer who mistook noise for power. Chen, meanwhile, was celebrated as the quiet truth teller, the figure who revealed that patience was not weakness but discipline. One columnist wrote, "He did in 7 words what hours of debate could not." He reminded us that clarity cuts deeper than shouting. For the audience, the reflection carried weight beyond the spectacle. They began to ask, what does this say about arrogance in politics? For years, the loudest voices had seemed to dominate, rewarded with attention if not respect. But this moment reframed the equation. It showed that arrogance, left unchecked, collapses under its own weight when confronted with unshakable calm. Viewers shared not just clips, but personal thoughts: how exhausting it was to live in a world of noise, how refreshing it felt to see dignity hold its ground. For Chen himself, the victory was not about trending charts or late-night applause. He returned to chambers with the same quiet routine, declining interviews, letting the moment speak for itself. His reflection was simple: the measure of strength is not in volume, but in clarity. He had not sought spectacle, yet the nation had glimpsed the power of restraint because he chose the precise moment to act, and within that reflection lay the broader theme. Silence, so often mistaken for passivity, revealed itself as preparation, a gathering of strength, a honing of precision. When deployed with intent, it became sharper than any outburst. Chen's single line was not spontaneous. It was the product of patience, of waiting until arrogance fully revealed itself, then striking with exactness. The fallout, then, was not just about one clash on television. It was about a cultural lesson. The world had been reminded that dignity does not vanish in the face of arrogance, and that the quiet voice, timed with precision, can still turn an entire stage upside down. One line proved stronger than an hour of noise. That was the lesson etched into the memory of everyone who witnessed the exchange. For weeks, audiences had endured the same wary rhythm of political spectacle, the loudest voices stealing the spotlight, the sharpest interruptions rewarded with airtime, the careful drowned out by the careless. Yet in one night, a quiet judge had reversed the formula. He had shown, with surgical timing, that clarity could do what chaos never could: silence arrogance and expose it for what it was. The cathartic relief was almost tangible. In living rooms across the country, people exhaled. For those who had grown accustomed to watching truth swallowed up by performance, the reversal felt like vindication. At last, someone had stood steady, letting arrogance burn itself out before calmly extinguishing it with a single sentence. The audience did not just cheer, they felt restored, reminded that dignity could still find its place in public life. But the power of the moment lay not just in the triumph, it lay in the contrast. Pam Bondi had come prepared with a strategy of volume and bravado, certain that dominating the stage meant controlling the narrative. And for a time it worked. The imbalance was real. Her interruptions painted Chen as hesitant, even fragile. Yet his decision to wait, to let the storm reach its peak before intervening, reshaped the entire arc. His restraint became the weapon. His silence became the setup. And when the line landed, it was not merely an interruption. It was the culmination of every second he had refused to be pulled into her rhythm. That is why the aftermath felt larger than a single clash. Commentators recognized it instantly. This was not just a debate moment, it was a shift in how audiences perceived power. For too long, noise had masqueraded as strength, but Chen had reminded viewers that strength, at its core, is the ability to stand firm while chaos thrashes all around. His single, unflinching sentence carried more gravity than hours of shouting. It exposed hypocrisy without excess, and for a fleeting instant, it restored balance to a stage tilted by arrogance. Zooming out, the moment slotted seamlessly into the cycles of political drama that define the age. Every few months, a confrontation breaks through the noise, crystallizing into a shared cultural touchstone. Some fade quickly, others linger for years. This one belonged to the latter category, not because of spectacle, but because of what it revealed: that truth is not extinct, only waiting for its chance to strike with precision. The political world, of course, did not stand still. Bondi, wounded but unbowed, sought to spin the narrative in her favor, insisting she had been ambushed, that the line was unfair. Yet the recordings betrayed her. Every replay reminded viewers of her stammer, her falter, the unmistakable fracture in her confidence. The more she protested, the deeper the impression sank that she had been overpowered by her own aggression. Meanwhile, Chen's silence in the aftermath added to his stature. He did not chase interviews, did not issue follow-up statements. His absence only amplified the memory of his words. The judge who rarely raised his voice had spoken once, and that was enough. The restraint that defined him became the very thing that elevated him in the eyes of the public. The broader narrative that emerged was clear: arrogance had been undone, and truth, briefly, powerfully, had been restored. It was a reminder that justice does not always arrive in sweeping gestures. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a single sentence, spoken with clarity at the exact moment when the noise is unsustainable. The catharsis of that realization rippled through viewers long after the broadcast ended. Yet beneath the relief, a deeper question began to stir. If one quiet judge could bring down a powerhouse in seconds, what did that say about the balance of power in the age of spectacle? And more importantly, who would be the next to face that kind of truth on live television? The cliffhanger hung in the air, unshakable. This was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a pattern. For every Bondi, there would be another figure convinced that volume equals dominance. And for every Chen, there remained the possibility that patience, silence, and timing could cut sharper than any outburst. The battle lines were not drawn in parties or policies, but in values: arrogance against dignity, noise against truth. In that tension lay the promise of future confrontations, and while no one could predict who the next players might be, one certainty lingered in the public imagination somewhere. Another voice was preparing to rise, another arrogance waiting to be undone. And when it came, the audience would be ready, leaning forward, waiting once again for the silence that precedes the line that changes everything. Judge Edward Chen shut down Pam Bondi with one savage line, and the world watched. It wasn't volume that won the night, it wasn't spectacle or bluster. It was the calm precision of a man who understood that sometimes the most devastating power lies in restraint. His words reminded us that arrogance, no matter how loud, always carries the seeds of its own undoing. Moments like this matter because they show us the difference between noise and truth, between dominance and dignity. They remind us that when arrogance rises unchecked, it takes only one clear voice to break through the chaos. Now imagine yourself in that studio. The lights glaring, the audience holding its breath, the clash unfolding live. Whose side would you have been on? Would you have leaned into the noise, or stood steady with the judge who chose clarity over spectacle? Drop your thoughts below. Share what you felt in that moment. And if you believe truth still matters in the public square, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join this community. Together, we amplify voices that cut through the noise and remind the world that silence, timed with precision, can shake everything.